White oppressive forces changed us in ways benefiting themselves. We changed from perceiving men like Martin and Malcolm as being our heroes to now perceiving our heroes as being rappers who gets upon global media platforms perpetuating the worst stereotypes about our racial group. Our heroes are also now athletes who do very little for our communities and who become millionaires by making white men into billionaires. It was by making athletes our heroes that they removed Black liberation from our collective psyche. It's why millions of Black men now cares more about sports statistics than they do Black liberation. We changed. We changed from yearning for Black liberation to now only wanting a comfortable position within the system of white supremacy. We changed. We changed from being so proud of our African culture and heritage that we wore afros, African braids, and we gave ourselves African names, to now being so ashamed of our African heritage that many of us now claims ourselves as being anything other than African, and we wear European weaves. We once all agreed that we came from Africa. Nowadays, millions of us now insist that we're not from Africa. We are now more confused and divided about our identity than at any previous time in history. Although millions of us have taken DNA analysis that have scientifically confirmed our African identity. We changed. We changed from resenting the white society for having brutally enslaved our ancestors to many of us now feeling grateful to the white society for having done so. We also changed from calling ourselves brothers and sisters and calling our oppressors crackers to now calling ourselves by the N-word while calling our oppressors white people, which clearly demonstrates that we're respecting ourselves much lesser and we're respecting them much more. We also unanimously agreed that white oppressive forces were our worst enemies. Today, millions of us are now insisting that we're our worst enemies. During the 1960s, we implemented the most successful unified protests in U.S. history. Today, we are now more divided than in any previous time in U.S. history. When you open your eyes and look at facts as they truly are, it becomes clear to see that the African American culture has fundamentally changed in ways benefiting the system of white supremacy. This is no strange occurrence. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed population changes in ways benefiting their oppressors. These noted changes within the African American population that clearly benefits the white society were deliberately achieved by an ideological subversion system that has been deployed against the African American population. Ideological subversion is an offensive psychological warfare tactic that uses disinformation, misinformation, and unrelenting propaganda programming to change a targeted population in ways that are against their own interests and instead in ways serving those who are deploying the ideological subversion system. It's an essential tool in information warfare. This disclosed ideological subversion system is being deployed against the African American population in response to the unprecedented unified Black protests of the 1960s. White oppressive forces embedded many conflicting, divisive, and confusing false ideologies into the African American population so that we're no longer able to come together and make sensible conclusions in the interest of liberating ourselves. Here are the details. In 1968, white social scientists were hired by the Kerner Commission to study the African American population to learn the reason for that decade's unprecedented unified Black protests against the white establishment. Their mission was to find the cause of it and then develop methods for subduing it. They determined that there were 3 aggravating core factors for the unprecedented unified Black protests. of the 1960s. The first one was an elevated and unifying Black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. The second thing they determined was that millions of African Americans had developed an allegiance towards Africa that hindered the growth of Black patriotism towards the U.S. government. The third thing they learned is that whenever people are oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until acts of massive rebellion becomes inevitable. The oppressed always eventually rebels. It's the inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are held under long-term oppression. This is what was happening among the African American population during the 1960s. They therefore determined that they could deploy an ideological subversion system to address these three core factors for the unprecedented unified Black protests. More specifically, white social scientists therefore determined that by hiring white propagandists to perpetually keep the Black population believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves, they could lower our collective self-esteem, demoralize us, divide us, and shift Black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards and against ourselves. The ultimate goal is to demoralize the Black population to such an extent that we begin to doubt our own ability to govern ourselves, and we believe that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, we believe that we're better off living under white dominance, and therefore we abandon all hopes of ever liberating ourselves. It also creates Black self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. This is the true reason why all narratives that Black people receive about ourselves from the white society are consistently negative and Black racially demoralizing. Now, here's how they eroded our allegiance to Africa. White social scientists determined that African Americans' allegiance towards Africa had to be eroded in order for our allegiance towards the United States to grow. To meet this objective, white propaganda designers were hired to turn Africa into a source of shame and humiliation for millions of African Americans. They achieved this feat by constantly inundating African Americans with media images of war-torn, famine-ridden, rampantly illiterate, and disease-stricken Africa, by only showing the poorest parts of Africa. This manipulates millions of African Americans to feel grateful for the enslavement of our ancestors, because the perception has become that slavery rescued us from the backwoodsness, terrible place of Africa. This increases Black allegiance towards the U.S., and it dissuades us from pursuing the reparations we're still owed. Some African Americans have been so heavily demoralized and humiliated by the white media's distorted, deplorable depictions of Africa that many will now accept any fable that allows them to claim themselves as being anything other than an African. This is why so many African Americans have embraced the false narratives that we're not Africans, although countless of millions of DNA analysis have scientifically proven that we are in fact from Africa. Psychologists call this response disassociation. It's a defense mechanism that evolves to put a distance between themselves and the white society's negative media depictions of Africa. All long-term demoralizing psychological warfare propaganda campaigns leave damages to their targeted populations. This propaganda campaign also prevents African Americans from, as I said before, from pursuing the reparation debt that the U.S. still owes us. This is because it causes many African Americans to perceive the enslavement of our ancestors as having been more of a rescue mission from the terrible place of Africa, rather than the true brutal Holocaust it truly was. These combined psychological warfare campaigns are used by white oppressive forces to subdue the unprecedented unified black protests of the 1960s. It's how white oppressive forces subdued it, and it's how they ensure that it never happens again. It has been extremely effective at subduing unified black protests. White oppressive forces changed us in ways benefiting themselves. This is all possible because regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the input of information that are fed into the collective minds of a targeted population, it's entirely possible to control what they'll believe, what they'll think, and how they'll behave. The white society exploits their monopoly over information and media images that we receive to indoctrinate mental enslaving lies into the minds of the black masses. And those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. White social engineering scientists also conditions us to be more accepting of white dominance over our lives during our education and development. The white educational system's failure to adequately provide black students with a racially affirming curriculum, as it does so for white students, is a hidden social science that is actually essential for maintaining white social dominance over the black population. Because for a ruling class to maintain its position of social dominance over the oppressed population, they must condition the oppressed from a very early age to accept their subordinate status and to adhere to the authority of the dominant culture. To do so, the education given to the oppressed population from the time that their minds are young and most impressionable must be the type that denies them of a racially affirming education. When the oppressed population is denied of a racially affirming education, this psychologically conditions them to perceive themselves through a false inherent subordinate identity that makes them more accepting of their subordinate status within a society dominated by their oppressors. When the oppressed population is denied of a racially affirming education, even the brightest among them may have difficulty mentally extracting themselves from their assigned low dominant position within the society. Denying black students of a black racially affirming education is essential for maintaining white social dominance. It's the true reason why black people learn more black racially affirming facts from each other than we do so within our white governed schools. African Americans are also the unknowing victims of the worst negative media social engineering in history. Those who write a people's narratives and that controls a people's media images literally controls their culture, because white oppressive forces writes all of our narratives and controls our media images. They negatively steer our culture while misleading us to believe that we're negatively steering ourselves. Case, point, and proof. Here's the true reason why millions of African Americans now self-identify by the N-word. White oppressive forces achieved this feat by hiring black actors, beginning during the 1960s black exploitation film, to call themselves by the N-word in movies. And doing so, millions of African Americans then began imitating the ridiculous behavior while insisting that we made the N-word ours, although we in fact did not. The behavior is the direct result of the hidden social science called negative media social engineering. This same negative media social engineering by white oppressive forces is also the reason why many African Americans now call themselves thugs, call our women B's and H's, sags our pants, and glorifies pimps. This is not some feeble-minded attempt to absolve ourselves of our own responsibility. I'm not scapegoating. This is a true hidden social science. It is time to wake up to our reality. White oppressive forces are waging a covert war against us that most black people don't understand. It is time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace.